Hello, welcome to the Tolkien Collector's Guide YouTube channel, where we gather experts from around the world to discuss Tolkien's books and the people who read them. I'm Urulókë, and with me are Trotter and Mr. Underhill.
Okay, well, welcome in everybody to the Tolkien Collector's Guide YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about Easton Press editions, specifically Tolkien Easton Press books. For those of you who are not familiar, there is a publishing company based out of the United States called the Easton Press, and they publish all types of books in a fine binding format. They are books that are marketed to people who are trying to build libraries, and so typically what they will do is they'll offer sets of books that you can get, really well-known works. And so, like, for example, one of the titles that Easton Press has had available since really the early 1980s in terms of Tolkien is The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, that you can purchase as a set. But over the years, they have offered various other Tolkien titles, and one of the things that they like to sort of portray to their customers is that these books are limited, like they have a limited availability, which that's one of the things that I think we can talk about here is whether or not Easton Press books are actually limited or not. But that's one of the things that they like to market to people is that these books are limited. So what you'll see is if you monitor sort of like what Easton Press is offering, you'll see that sometimes they will take titles out of their store and then they'll bring them back in to sort of like demonstrate that the fact that they're limited. One of the other things that Easton Press does is they're a very fine binding press. So they will market their books as, these are books that you can have for a lifetime, that you can sort of hand down to your children. They're uniform to a certain extent, and that's something that we can talk about here as well, is they all are, in terms of Tolkien books, they're all a certain color. They're this darker green color, except for a few titles that have a different color. They all have gilt edges on the pages. They're gold gilt. The end papers are all very similar. And one of the things that's frustrating for collectors, especially people who collect other Tolkien books besides Easton Press, is it's difficult to tell which Easton Press book you're getting, like which printing you're getting, which variation you're getting, which era of Easton Press book you're getting. One of the things I tell people who ask about Easton Press, they ask me about Easton Press, is what the prices are like on the secondhand market. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is that Easton Press books on the secondhand market the prices are quite high as compared to if you're buying it directly from Easton Press. And I always tell people that if you wait long enough, Easton Press will probably bring it back into print. You may have to wait several years, but Easton Press will definitely bring a title back in print. A good example of that is the Beowulf title. One of the books that I think Easton Press did really well was their Tolkien's translation of Beowulf that was published by Christopher Tolkien and HarperCollins in, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, 2014.
I think it was around about 2014.
And so Easton Press published an edition around that time that's blue, and it's got Tolkien's drawing of the dragon on the cover. It's very well done, but they took it out of the store after some time, and it's been fetching a very high price on the secondhand market. And but just recently, Easton Press brought it back. So that's one of the things that we could talk about here too, is that why is Easton, and that's one of the things that I mentioned in the article that I published for the guide a few months ago. I posed the question to everybody on the site is, why do you think Easton Press suddenly has a lot of Tolkien titles available? Because they went through several years where they had very few Tolkien titles available, and then all of a sudden they have lots and lots of Tolkien titles available. So there's been some speculation about that as well. Yeah, exactly. Jeremy's rubbing his chin there. Why does Easton Press all of a sudden offering all of these, different Tolkien titles? So Easton Press has done a lot of Tolkien titles over the years. What did we say, Jeremy, before we started? 36?
I think it's
different.
As of 2 years ago, it was in the mid 30s. I think it's now probably up into the mid 40s or maybe even 50 titles. And those aren't just primary Tolkien works. They're also doing secondary works like Fonstad's Atlas, Foster's Complete Guide. They did the the movie art books for Peter Jackson. So the art of the Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers, Return of the King, etc. So there's a lot of secondary works related to Tolkien as well that are in their series.
The only Easton Press book that Andrew has, John Garth's Worlds of Middle Earth, they did that recently, which I think is pretty well done.
It's a very nice. It's a nice book, and having only got one book, obviously, you look at that and you think, well, I'll be quite happy to get some more like this because it's a good quality book.
Yeah, I do feel that their focus has been on like a really high quality reading book. Like it's meant to be held and handled and last 100 years, or I don't know what their marketing messaging around that is, but there are real leather. They are sewn bindings. They're meant to withstand use over time. Since they don't indicate prints, so there's no such thing that you can really tell for a first print of an Easton Press edition. They just, when they re-release it, it's usually indistinguishable from previous impressions or printings. So in my mind, I think a large part of the secondary market pricing being higher than theirs is the fact that they won't ship internationally. And so a lot of people in the US will buy copies and then list them at a markup and then international collectors who are interested in these books can't order them directly from the website from Easton Press. And so they'll go to the secondary market and be willing to pay a premium. You know, when they go out of print, when they're not available, the secondary, they are collectible. There's a very large Easton Press collecting community, not just for Tolkien, but for Easton Press in general. So when their books are not available, they do tend to go up in price on the secondary market and then start to come down when they go back in print. It's very hard in Tolkien Easton Press books. I don't think you often or ever really see them under list price. You know, occasionally you might see one that was donated to a charity shop or something, but they're certainly holding their value.
Yes, it's
well,
very
I think
rare.
You mentioned this earlier, but as you can't really tell what printing they are, then the printing priority doesn't really have a preference that much on it. People just if you want a copy of The Hobbit, you just buy a copy of The Hobbit. You can't really necessarily tell which one it is.
I think that Easton Press does Tolkien publications justice in a lot of ways. I think the respect for the work is there in terms of like the way that they're bound, the way that the work is presented in a lot of ways is great. But I also think that Easton Press cuts a lot of corners in terms of the way that they present the work as well. I mean, we talked before we started about how if you get an Easton Press Silmarillion, the ruins on the Silmarillion are exactly like they are on The Hobbit. They say the same exact message that they do on The Hobbit. And so that's obviously problematic if you're you're serious about Tolkien and you're serious about the work. Like that to me says that we don't take the work seriously. This is just something that we're, another title that we're selling. So obviously I, as a Tolkien collector, have some issues with that. I know, Andrew, you stated that you have some issues with the uniformity too, of like the heights and the spines and things like that.
Well, I think if you're collecting something like this with, say, leather books, you're going to put them on your shelf and you're going to put all the books together in a line. And the idea is you want them to be uniform to a certain degree. You want them to look pretty similar across the shelf with the different titles on them. Some publishers are good at doing this. I'd have to say HarperCollins have done that with the deluxe editions. They are largely, they don't always work, but largely they do. You put them together on the shelf and they look really nice. But that isn't really necessarily the case of Easton Press because they've changed the sizes of the books. Sometimes they've changed the colours for no reason. And I believe they've even changed them cross-printing. So you might get a Hobbit that's one size at one point and a smaller size later on. This isn't really what you should be doing, I think, with I'd say prestige books like that. There should be some uniformity in them.
Yeah, all the Easton Press books, the Tolkien titles are dark green, except for two. The one I mentioned earlier, the Beowulf title is blue, and then the Fall of Arthur, actually, the publication was red, and then if you go to the store now, they brought Fall of Arthur back into print in the store, but it's not red anymore; it's green. They're using that dark green on there. So that's actually a really easy Easton Press title to identify if you got an early print, because if you got a red one, you've got an earlier one. But yeah, Andrew's right. I mean, I'm looking at my shelf right now. I've got the original titles lined up: The Hobbit, Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings. They're all uniform, but then I have Children of Hurin and Beren and Luthien next to them, and they're completely different. They're different heights. They're different. The spine is different. So it's, if I'm building a library where I want the books to look a certain way, that's definitely a drawback as well.
Yeah, and they did something odd with the history of Middle Earth, didn't they? They published the history of the Lord of the Rings, which is the 4 middle volumes of the history of Middle Earth, but they only published the fraction of the 4th book that was specifically Lord of the Rings related, and they've never published the second half of that volume.
Which is the Notion Club papers.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Easton Press has the rights to Sauron Defeated. I'm not. It maybe have something to do with their previous agreement with Houghton Mifflin, because Houghton Mifflin published the history of the Lord of the Rings for years, right? But the American box set doesn't have Sauron Defeated. It has it has the end of the Third Age, which is basically the abbreviated Sauron, which is what you're getting if you buy the Easton Press history of the Lord of the Rings. Is you're getting that. You're getting those sheets that Easton Press is binding.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy, maybe you should speak on some of the nuances that Easton Press may have with Houghton Mifflin, and now there may be some sort of new agreement with HarperCollins.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously still producing these titles, so I'm hopeful that their license agreement will continue and move forward. But Easton Press is sort of the prestige publisher in the United States. They specifically have licensed rights to make these editions in the U.S., an equivalent to the deal that the Folio Society has in the U.K., where the Folio Society occasionally produces Lord of the Rings or Tolkien titles in general for the UK market, and they don't sell in the US. The Easton Press produces here and doesn't sell in the UK and elsewhere. They've specifically had their agreement with Houghton Mifflin, the American publisher, from the 1980s on for Tolkien titles. Since Houghton Mifflin, about a year and a half ago, sold their trade fiction department to HarperCollins. So there still is a publisher called Houghton Mifflin, but they're in the educational space. They do textbooks and other things for schools. And then the trade department, which is also contained all the Tolkien titles, was then acquired by HarperCollins. So now HarperCollins, the international publisher, has the rights to both the UK and the US markets. It's not clear, I think, yet on whether Easton Press will, they probably have some rights agreement that goes for a certain amount of time, and they'll have to renew those with HarperCollins now moving forward. I'm really hopeful that Tolkien titles will continue from Easton Press, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, and obviously, as you said, it could be that's why they're doing so many at the moment, because they're possibly thinking, well, we might not have the rights for that much longer. We may as well try and print as much as we can while we have the rights still.
And that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that Easton Press is about to lose the rights, which is why they're getting everything out into the store before the rights run out.
Sure. Well, and it could just as easily be that with the Amazon Prime TV show coming out, they just know the market is going to be hot for Tolkien, and so they're just getting as many titles out as they can, and they'll continue chugging along. It's really hard to say which way it's going to fall, but certainly Tolkien's selling really well right now, and Easton Press is well positioned to take advantage.
And also, you mentioned Folio Society. Folio can now sell outside of the UK, so I wonder if Easton Press might be trying to say, well, why can't we sell outside the US as well? Mm-hmm. Because that would certainly, from their point of view, help if they could sell worldwide as well. Yeah,
definitely. Being in the US, I've never tried to order from Easton Press. I know that they do support international ordering, but I believe that it's based on title. So it looks like you can add Tolkien to your shopping cart, but then when you try and check out, it enforces the geographic limitations on those specific titles. There's other titles that they have worldwide rights to. It's just Tolkien that I think is US only.
You can't enter a non-US address at the. So I tried this.
Uh-huh.
You can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the big differences too with Easton Press and Folio Society is Easton Press goes for uniformity across years, across prints, right? Everything is supposed to be the same. It's never supposed to change. Folio Society, they will do. They have their Tolkien titles that they've had for 25 years that haven't changed, but they'll do limited releases as well. Easton Press doesn't do much of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at some point, I might actually be interested in like a 12-volume history of Middle Earth that's all uniform and high-end leather, etc. But with the small variations in the production between the volumes that Easton Press did, I just haven't pulled the trigger on anything like that myself.
Yeah, and that's there's the history of the Lord of the Rings issue with Easton Press. There's also Book of Lost Tales Volume 1 and 2 are completely different from the rest of their History of Middle Earth offerings. Like they look completely different.
Yeah,
because they sell them in a set with unfinished tales, so they match unfinished tales, not the rest of the. And so that's what I mean when I said earlier, like they don't. I have some issues with Easton Press and how they treat Tolkien's work. I don't know. It seems a lot of it seems kind of suspect.
Yeah, I have one book myself. I happen to have the Letters from Father Christmas. I do love the production quality of it. There's nothing wrong with Easton Press volumes. I think they are very well made. If you like them,
no, not at
absolutely go for them. As we mentioned earlier, from a collectability standpoint, there's all signs that they're holding their value. People still want them years after they've gone out of print. They look individually, I think they look nice for the most part. If you start to build a really large collection, as Chad is noting, you'll start to see they don't look uniform across the shelf from title to title, but the individual titles themselves absolutely worth it. If you like the green leather or mostly green leather look, they are very high quality. I think they're worth the price.
And they do stand up to repeated readings. Like if you want a reading copy that you can't really damage by repeated reads, that's the book you're looking for.